One night, three guys met in a bar, one of which was an artist called Conrad Rosette, for a going-away party and started to chat about video games. During the conversation, Rosette explained to these other guys that he had always thought about making a video game, but never had, and was looking for people to help him. Luckily for him, the other two men, Adrian Cuevas and Roger Mendoza, had made video games. They'd both worked with Ubisoft on Rainbow Six Siege, among others, but they'd wanted to make something fresh, something new, and they were interested in creating an independent game, but didn't have the artistic skills. They had a bunch of beers, and Conrad drew his first sketch right there in the bar. He told the others, "I want to make a game where the colors are very important." This would be the first step in the creation of a video game called Gris, or Grey in Spanish. This was the start of Nomada Studios, which the three formed to create this game. They experimented with the idea of a grey world which colour is gradually introduced into. After making this, they quit their jobs, hired a few people and gave 100% of their time to this passion project. Their aim? To create a 15-minute prototype that they could take to Gamescom in Germany and show it off to publishers in the hopes that they would get funded, and that's exactly what Devolver Digital did. Devolver Digital has a record of taking on independent projects such as Hotline Miami and what the hell is this? After this, Nomada Studios, a team of around 20 people, 79% of which had never even worked on a game before, began development of the game, which took them 24 months. It's hard not to talk about the art style of this game made by Conrad Rosette. It is simply one of the most beautiful looking games I have ever had the pleasure of playing. It has such a timeless look to it. Nobody will be talking about this game not being in 8K or having dated models and textures. 10 years from now, they will just be appreciating the visual oasis that is on offer here. It wouldn't surprise me if people who studied art had done entire essays and papers on this. Unfortunately, I am not one of those people, so I will simply use the medium to my advantage and let the visuals speak for themselves. The gameplay of Gris was designed to be an accessible 2D platformer that was, in Mendoza's words, meant to be smooth and accessible for everyone. And that really comes across. From the way there is never any big consequences for failure, such as bottomless pits or enemies to get stuck on. Instead, the main focus is around your own introspection during Gris's journey. What the game focuses on are puzzles where the abilities Gris learns are used to overcome them. The more things she learns, the more puzzles she can complete. The experience is always quite seamless though, and the team definitely went out of their way to really make this linear journey special. The band, Berlinist, did the music for the game, and their music sets up just as much of the tone and style as the visuals of Gris. Some of the inspirations they had were Ico, Another World, and Shadow of the Colossus, all with epic compositions, and that definitely comes through in their soundtrack. From the impending organs heralding the coming storm to the more quiet, melancholic moments that Gris experiences throughout her journey. The whole experience of Gris is only around 3 hours long, but through the whole game, the evolution of the music is always guiding the player, adding a new dynamic to the music every time Gris brings a colour back into the world. From the melancholic synth to the raw emotion expressed through the strings, it all works so perfectly to build up the scene and for us to live through Gris as she embarks on her journey. Through my research into the making of the levels, Berlinist leaned heavily into something called synesthesia. Now, synesthesia is a neurological phenomenon that couples two or more senses together and affects around 4% of the population. It's a more common phenomenon than you might think. For example, whenever you watch a TV show and you have a character speaking, you always think that the sound is coming from the character's mouth, when in actual fact it's coming from your headphones or from your TV speakers. What Berlinist did was honed in on the link between music and colour. Synesthesia differs from one person to another, but it means some people actually see sounds as colour. For example, the colour yellow has been most commonly linked to the chord of E. So, to fuse the art and the music together, what the band did was they compared different studies on synesthesia, finding the colours for their chords. So each new level that Gris discovers is based around a different chord, which represents a different colour, and ultimately a new stage of grief for our character. As well as this, you have at the very start of the game a very stripped back version of the melody, only giving you the main theme with piano and background synth. But as you progress to the other stages of grief, more instruments start to layer into the soundscape. This works in tandem with the colours of the world coming back, really giving you a gateway into Gris's emotional state. During the last stages of grief, acceptance, Gris is able to connect with the music herself by finally finding her own voice again and giving life to the environment surrounding her, showing us that she is on a path of healing. Gris starts in the hands of a statue. Now, there are a few interpretations as to who the statue represents. The interpretation I'm going with is the statue is Gris's mother. There is vibrant colour in the scene and Gris is singing. Suddenly the hand begins to crumble, symbolising her mother's death, and Gris loses her voice and begins her descent into grey, which represents the first of the 5 stages of grief. After the fall, we see Gris is only able to walk. After walking every couple of feet, she drops to the ground, defeated. The camera slowly pulls out, showing us that Gris is in a bigger world now, and Gris looks up to the sky one last time before. This is the first ability that she learns again, and fits well with the first stage of grief. Grey is the colour that represents denial in the game. It is the most empty of the colours that Gris comes across, representing a lack of emotion, almost like Gris is in a state of shock. Once she starts running, we are also introduced to the piano and ambient synth once more, giving a small amount of life back into the world. We start to see ruins surrounding Gris as she travels onwards, having been reduced to rubble, which is reminiscent of the hand breaking at the start of the game. As she travels onwards, we find our next colour. Red pours onto the sky, completely transforming the mood of the environment. This is accompanied by a cello being added to the score. Red is the colour most commonly linked with anger and can be seen as an attempt at refusal of grief and can be seen as self-destructive. It is also here where we first see life in the world, with stripped back red trees and subtle flowers, but ones which still have colour, showing the landscape is starting to change along with Gris. Further along the path, as Gris jumps down the side of a red mountain, the music swells, and we have our first real moment of reflection as we land in a slightly different world. A barren desert. It is here where the ambient piano gets overshadowed by the organ and brings a storm onto Gris, where she has to seek refuge in caves. To prevent herself from being swept away by the winds, she learns her second ability, to be able to plant herself on the ground. This allows her to brave the storm without protection from the environment, showing us that anger can be useful, but then the game reminds us that only using anger can also wake something up that can hurt us if used too much. After we enter a temple, we use the heavy ability to break down into a different world. A world again without colour that mirrors her own, but in using the ability down there, she disturbs something which comes back later on in the game. We also come across a puzzle whereby Gris uses her power to break a creature from its rock, causing the creature to flee and hide, showing us if we only rely on anger, we push away those around us. For the third stage, green is added to the scene. The violin is welcomed back into the soundscape and vines sprout around Gris, giving us our first look at flourishing vegetation. Green is also the colour of nature, life, and represents our third stage, bargaining. Now, bargaining is about us trying to make deals with ourselves or perhaps a higher power during the grieving process. It is also when we evaluate what happened and ask ourselves what we could have done differently and wish that we could go back to the moment in hopes of a different outcome. We are introduced to our third part of the world and the most different so far, a forest. During this stage we also still see that our last colour of red is still with us, within some of the trees and bathing the scene in an almost warm glow. The red is sometimes more prevalent than the other colour of green, showing us that grief is not a linear process, but a cumulative one. Each colour added at each new stage is still present in each subsequent stage in one form or another. It is also here where we use our heavy ability again, but with a different outcome than before. We break through a floor and knock an apple out of a tree by accident. A little creature comes out and eats the apple before cautiously following you. Then we get the opportunity to start helping the creature of our own accord, seeing more apples for us to knock down. And after we do this, the creature approaches Gris and they start to form a bond. The same power that scared and alienated one creature from Gris has been used in a different way that forms a bond instead of breaking it. It is also here where the narrative tells us not only to rely on ourselves, but to help others and let them help us too, which is exactly what the creature does, helping us solve puzzles by mimicking our actions and ultimately giving us the key to the next area. Here, we learn our next ability. The ability to float down as opposed to fall and fly up in certain places marked by the red butterflies. This could be linked with the benefits of friendship, where you are able to help each other out as opposed to going alone. After making it to the temple in the clouds, we are finally confronted with what we woke during our anger in the form of a giant bird stalking us as we try to escape its grasp. Its liquid-like form presented as alien and completely different to the rest of what has come before. What the bird represents is open to interpretation, but in my eyes, it's the manifestation of anger that Gris feels towards herself, almost haunting her. After evading this bird, Gris is changed by the encounter, and as we get a broken look at the statue of her mother, we move on to the fourth stage. Blue spills out, blotting the sky. A chorus is heard and floods the scene before rain comes pouring out of the sky. Blue is the colour of depression and represents what we most commonly associate with grief, and is shown in Gris with water being a pool that you can lose yourself in, muffling everything else around you and eventually making you lose sight of what to do next. It's no mistake that in this part of the game, blue dominates the scene as she goes deeper into a cave. As Gris goes deeper into the cave, we get less and less light, accompanied with a melancholic, almost muffled synth track to guide us along. It is underwater where we learn how to swim. Gris glides through the water, enveloped in her sadness, and the player is able to move faster than ever before, possibly hinting at how depression can be comforting, but to stay in it for too long can consume you. After delving into the dark with the help of a red turtle, you find Gris's mother once more at the bottom of the cave, but this time she's nearly whole. The statue opens its eyes, and Gris enters the last of the 5 stages. The moon silhouettes Gris and her mother's statue, and Gris's own voice is heard in the background with the music this time. Yellow is the color of acceptance, and Gris tries to sing for the first time since the start of the game, but can't quite come out with anything yet. But she's trying again. Before she's able to attempt again, the bird comes back in pursuit of Gris, breaking the statue and turning into an eel to race after her. While in flight, Gris starts to go through caverns so dark you would not find your way without the light that the yellow glow gives you, as you start to find your way out of the cave that you have dived into before. The chorus swells as the eel is about to consume you. The red turtle comes out of the darkness to save you. Gris now has all 5 of the stages, and she uses every one of them at this point onwards to survive the journey. It's not just one thing that helps you come to terms with grief, but all of them together. From here, Gris comes back to the world, which is now bathed in moonlight, revealing ethereal structures which were hidden before. This isn't a journey Gris could have ever done before, as it takes everything she's learned to get through this section. It's here where Gris finally learns how to sing again, and is the last thing she needs to learn. As you sing, everything within the bubble you cast brings life to plants, letting you know that not only Gris is being healed, but she has learned to help others heal too, which helps her in the final stage of the game. Here the world becomes inverted, where you switch between being upside down and being the right way up, solving puzzles and healing the environment around you as you go until you sing to the stars and Gris is able to turn her world around one last time. At this point, you think that's the game about to wrap up, for the credits to start rolling as you make your way up the star path until the eel comes back and changes into its true form. It is Gris herself, screeching and wiping the colour from the world that you've been desperately trying to give back this whole time, and knocks Gris into freefall, reminiscent of the start of the game until you're consumed. The blackness fades, leaving only grey as Gris swims to the surface with pieces of her mother floating around her. She begins her ascent for the final time and stands where she did at the start of the game, and she sings to her mother one last time, bringing all the pieces of her back before the darkness takes our protagonist once more. As the last pieces of the mum form, Gris resigns herself to her fate before another voice is heard. Her mother's, defeating the darkness that poisoned Gris's soul and brings back the world that she's fought so hard for. Gris is finally able to accept that she will never be able to bring her mother back, but that her mother is still a part of herself and is finally able to say goodbye to her. And afterwards, you are the one who needs to turn away and leave Gris's mother, because that's what has to happen before we can move on in life. Gris takes one last look at her mother before disappearing into the clouds above, finally at peace with herself. Gris is a journey that we've all been on in some way, shape or form. We've all lost something in our lives that has taken colour and music away from us. It's a reminder not to lean into our anger as our only way of expression, that depression is a cave that you must eventually escape. It's a reminder that friendships can help you through your own journeys, and that in the end, you have to be the one who finds peace and moves on to the next adventure. Gris achieves this by being a game accessible to everyone, because the story of Gris is something everyone's been through. It achieves this by blending some of the greatest music ever written for a game with the most incredible visuals ever displayed in a game. It builds such an incredible metaphor for loss, which doesn't need words for you as a player to understand what the title character is going through. And speaking for myself, I played this game at the perfect time as I could relate to her journey, which I believe most people can in their own way. And that is why Gris has the power to move you.
Helper.